Alright, so welcome everyone to the first episode of this series. I rarely do series type videos, but I figured with everything going on, us kind of being still under a stay-at-home order, there still being very limited releases in terms of film or any film really worth talking about, theaters being closed and all that good stuff, the Oscars in question, I figured it would be cool to do something regarding the past and the history of the Academy Awards, just considering this channel. I wanted to do something a little bit different than what most Oscar channels are doing, which are like retrospectives and taking years and going through each individual category or talking about what exactly happened. There will be some of that in this when I get there to years that something interesting happened, something notable, something memorable, a historical moment in the Oscars. Like when we get to the 1940s, I'll talk about Citizen Kane and its defeat in many of its categories. But primarily what this series is going to be watching and then me reviewing and discussing the Academy Award winners for Best Picture from the 1920s to today with Parasite. This series will likely span longer than us being in lockdown as a result of the amount of movies. There are 92 of them. Many I've seen, many I haven't. I think between like the 20s and the 40s, a lot of them are going to be first-time watches for me, which will be really cool. Both of these that I watched for this first video are first-time watches. The way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to break it up in a decade, do a video per decade, hopefully like a week or two apart, roughly. There are 10 movies to watch per episode, so it's going to take a little bit. With the exception of this one, I'm going to talk a little more in detail about these two films because time allows. The 1920s so far is the only decade to not have 10 Best Picture winners. We'll see if this decade changes that. But yeah, so we're going to start out by talking about these first two Oscar winners for Best Picture, starting out with Wings, which was the original and the very first Best Picture winner. It is one of two silent films to win Best Picture, but the only silent film to win in having to be a silent film. The Artist was a silent film by choice. There was no sound around for Wings. On its surface, this movie is really discouraging to watch, I think, for an average viewer, because no one really is longing to watch a silent film unless you're a film aficionado. On top of that, the movie is about 2.5 hours long. So I admit, when I sat down to watch this with my girlfriend, who I watched this with, I'm making her watch all of them, we were both a little bit like, all right, kind of strap in, buckle your seatbelts, get comfy and watch a 2.5 hour silent film. And it's kind of about everything you'd expect from a silent movie, right? The cheesiness, the over-the-top element of it. But I found myself actually really, really loving this movie. A lot more than I thought I would. The beginning is like very silent film era, and you're kind of like, is this what the entire movie is going to be? But then it actually becomes something really, really cool, and something I didn't expect. I recently rewatched Dunkirk, because it was difficult to not see elements of Dunkirk in this movie. The practicality in this thing is really actually genuinely impressive. The use of real planes and the way that they captured like dogfight sequences that are actually kind of captivating and thrilling and gripping. And I know I sound surprised by this, but you just have to remember the technology that was available in the 20s. I mean, these guys didn't have sound in their movies, but they were able to actually get up in the air above the clouds and film fucking dogfight sequences for a world war. And it's really cool stuff. You get two genuinely interesting characters, and unlike another movie I'm going to be talking about in this video, they're likable in their own respects, but also have their gripes, have their flaws. You can connect to one or the other, or you can connect to the dynamic between the two, both of which I think are equally as interesting. And though, of course, it's a little bit rushed, because I don't think character development was perfectly nailed down in 1927, I found both characters to be unique and interesting in their own right. Their acting is strong, and it definitely separates the two from one another and makes the climax that much more interesting, which in and of itself, right, in a time where movies were primarily uplifting and happy, I think, at least, from what I was shown in my film education thus far, I was surprised by how kind of dark this movie got and how it dealt with emotion and loss, and it's violent, you know, when someone gets shot, they like spit out blood, and it's black and white, so it was like fucking chocolate syrup, I think they said. But the end of the movie, like, is pretty dark. And it's hard to say that it's a cliche, because in a certain degree it is, right? You go into a war film and you assume, like, okay, not everyone's getting out of this thing alive. A character we're going to grow to like is going to die. I guess this is slight spoilers, but the movie's almost 100 years old, so I apologize. But it's the movie that probably started those cliches, or one of the few that started these cliches. So you can't really blame the movie for being cliched. As a result, I have a lot of credit, and I have a lot of respect for the ending of this film, because I really didn't expect it to go in that direction. And when it did, I was pleasantly surprised, because you grow to realize that there are stakes in these movies. The last, 54 minutes, and I know because we paused about halfway through, or a little over halfway through, I guess, are, genuinely thrilling. And it's a whole kind of epic scale. And it's the first epic, I guess, that the Academy ever awarded. It kind of set the standard for this idea that when the Academy awards Best Picture, they like their epics, they like their Bravehearts, you know. And you can see that it is an epic when you're watching it. There's some funky shit, obviously. Some of the movie is comedic on purpose for being the sake of overly satirical. Some of it I think is funny not on purpose. Like, for instance, there's this, in terms of being on purpose, there's this character that kind of disappears who is, very clearly German. He's got, a super German name. And throughout, the first 30 minutes of the movie, people keep, beating on him, and they're like, fuck you, you can't be in the war, you're a German. And he goes, no, check this out. And he starts, stripping down, and he's got this, American flag tattoo on his bicep, and they're all like, oh, fuck, and they, lift him up, and they pat him on the back, and you're like, you're a patriot, and it's kind of funny, because that's, in a sense, what America was like when World War I came around. It was just any sign of love for this country, and it was like, you're a hero, you can fight for us. I thought that was pretty funny. But then you have, there's a sequence where the main character, Jack, gets just sloshed, just gets hammered. And it's like the director and writers had never been drunk before or seen anyone drunk. He starts, seeing bubbles coming out of everything, and is, attracted to whatever is producing the most amount of bubbles. And it's really quite unusual and comedic in the sense of you're watching this and you're like, that's not what it's like to be intoxicated. Maybe that was the point, but I can tell you for sure it's really fucking funny. Despite the runtime, I guess what's craziest to me is I found myself genuinely entertained from start to finish. I was enthralled in the characters. I wanted to know what would happen to the two of them, as well as the other side characters, the relationships. You know, there's romance in this film, and it was captivating. It's long, but it's rarely boring. I won't say it's never boring. There are sequences that run too long. But as a whole, I found myself thoroughly entertained by this movie. I never felt an inclination to, turn it off or stop. We paused halfway through because I had to go somewhere. But, I could easily sit through this in one sitting. I don't think it moves poorly. I was surprised when there was an hour left, but then watching that hour, I understood why. The score is also really interesting. If you listen closely, you can hear other movies in it. Because, it's one of the first films to develop original scoring. And you can see inspiration that other films take. Not just in the score, but like I said, the story and the structure and the way that other war films in many later decades have tailored to. I think this is a really interesting movie to watch. An important one, not just because it's the first Best Picture winner, but for any war film fan. I think it's definitely something to check out just on the basis of it's a big one. It's one that kind of started a lot. And it's impressive. The scale of it is really impressive. The production value is really impressive. There are large set pieces and war sequences that are displayed, and I found myself genuinely taken aback by the scale of it. I definitely think this film is worth a watch. I think I threw it a 9 out of 10, and I think it's very much deserving of a high rating of that sort. Now that we've talked about a good Best Picture winner, let's talk about a piece of dog shit, shall we? We have 1929's The Broadway Melody, which is a colossal disaster of a film. I had read on Letterboxd reviews, I just looked it up, And I was surprised to see how low the rating was before I'd watched the movie, and like, the reviews are really painful for it. People are talking about how miserable of an experience it is. And it was the first Best Picture with sound, first musical Best Picture. And I went in intrigued, and I was like, can it really be that bad? And the first, like, 40 minutes, it was not good. But it wasn't horrific. I found myself feeling that it was muddled and a little bit all over the place. But the dialogue was okay. In the 20s and the 30s, I find, and even in the 40s, there was this wit when it came to dialogue that I don't think has ever been quite replicated as well as it was in those decades. It feels like almost Sorkin writing to a degree that like disappeared for a few decades before Sorkin came into play again in the 90s. And I really like that kind of dialogue, and a lot of it's funny, and there were moments in this movie where a couple lines got me. I could tell it was flat, and I could tell it was muddled, but I didn't hate it. And then the last hour started, and I grew to hate this movie more and more as it went on. By the end of it, you are begging for it to fucking end. You really are. You really want this thing to just stop. It becomes truly unbearable. It is one of the most obnoxious films I think I've ever watched. As I made a crack at earlier with characters, the characters in this, there are three main characters, I guess. You have the two main girls, the Something Sisters. You can tell, like, it's different because I remember the names of the two main guys from Wings, and I can barely remember the names of these characters. There's the Something Sisters, and then I think Eddie is the name of the guy that they both love. I'm going to spoil the shit out of this movie, by the way, because you can't talk about it without talking about the whole plot. So you have Hank, which is the girl, and then Eddie, and they're together. And then Eddie starts hitting on the sister. They're all in Broadway. And then the sister starts falling for Eddie while she's fucking this other guy that Hank and Eddie hate. Eddie hates Eddie hates the guy because he's in love with Queenie, which is the sister, and Hank doesn't like the guy because she's annoying. And then at the end of the movie, when like there's this big blow up climax of all of them screaming at each other, like that's not the whole rest of the movie, Hank tells Eddie that she's not actually in love with him and she's been using him, and then Eddie goes and gets with Queenie, and then at the end they're all fine and happy together. And Hank is like best friends with Eddie and Queenie, even though she admitted to using him for money, which I feel like as a guy would probably piss you off, and you wouldn't be happy just because you got to have sex with the sister. That's the fucking movie. It's just, none of the characters are likable. Every one of them. The three main characters all have deceitful methods. They're all annoying. They're all mean to each other. There is no one to like or root for in this entire fucking movie. Not one person. Everyone sucks. And it makes this experience that much more painful. On top of that, it is a visually flat movie in every respect. It is like watching a play, and a bad play at that. The camera is right where you are. I'm here, and that never changes. I'm having a fucking dialogue scene with someone right here, and we're standing here together. There's no fucking close-ups. It's just gonna sit here for 5 minutes while we talk to each other, and it's fucking maddening, and it's unbearable to watch. Like, ugh. And like I said, the plot is so muddled. These characters keep getting introduced that nobody cares about, and by the end, the ending is so unearned, it's crazy. What, are you supposed to feel happy that the boyfriend and the sister wound up together? Like, who cares? They suck. I didn't want them to end up together. The whole movie, these two, Hank and Eddie, are shitting all over the sister for dating this guy, and there's truly nothing wrong with the guy. I watching the whole thing, he like spoils her. It's very 1920s guy, but he like buys her a fucking apartment. He seems really sweet to her, and then at the end they throw in that he's like kind of rapey because by the end we have to dislike him so that she can wind up with the other guy who's still a piece of shit. He's just as bad, if not worse. Like, you can't throw in a character trait at the end of the movie to make us dislike him. He has to be a shithead the entire movie so that at the very least we're agreeing with somebody. I don't agree with anybody when this whole fucking movie's going on, because even she's going out with the guy, she's even fucking like the guy. She wants to fuck the sister's boyfriend. Like, it's so all over the place, it's insane. Like, I can't even recall certain things. And then the movie's an hour and 40 minutes long. They pad it. There's 2 scenes that are just musical numbers out of the musical that they're in. It's like, I don't care. I didn't rent this movie to watch the musical that they produce. I rented this movie to watch them making the musical that they produce. You know, I don't care to watch these musical numbers that have nothing to do with the plot. Because it didn't have fucking anything to do with the plot. It's so ridiculous, and it's so padded. It's so short, and it feels like a fucking eternity. Most of these problems hit with the last 50 minutes to an hour. Again, the first 40 minutes are tough, but they're not that bad. I was like, it's a 4 or a 5 out of 10. By the end of this movie, I was like, this is a 2, and I think that's generous. It's truly mind-boggling that this thing picked up Best Picture. The fucking competition that this thing must have faced. That's like all I've got for this one. It's just bad. It's just really bad. It's got to be one of the worst Best Picture movies for sure. I haven't rewatched Crash yet. We'll get there when we get there, or like fucking The English Patient. But it's pretty agonizing. You know, even the use of sound, you can't really discredit them on. It's rough. Like, you know, they're obviously using one microphone. Anytime a character turns their back, you can hear maybe 50 to 60% of what they're saying. There are these weird, like, insert shot cuts that should have Foley or, like, background noise over them that don't. And what's weird is how long those shots last. Like, if it's 2 people looking at each other, they'll cut the sound, but the look should be a couple seconds, and it lasts like 15 per look. And so you're sitting there in dead silence with this uncomfortable look. And you're like, well, why didn't they just cut the film? Just make it look a little less. Someone had to watch that and go, that's awkward. That's weird. Right? Anyone? Hello? Anyway, that's it for the first 2 Best Picture winners. That's the 1920s. I'm going to be pumping out the 30s really soon. I'm watching the first one tonight, which I believe is All Quiet on the Western Front, is the first Best Picture winner of the 30s. So the 30s, by technicality, will go from 1930 to 1939. Those will be the films that we watch and will be covered in the 1930s video. By the time this video is up, I'm hoping that there will be some channel rebranding. I'm getting Brooklyn to make a new logo and a new banner, and the thumbnails for these I think will be really, really cool. So continue to support the channel if you are enjoying what you're watching. I appreciate all of you guys who are sticking around through this. I know it's tough with there not being much of an Academy season right now. I'm trying to make do with what I can. I don't usually do this. If you are out protesting right now, I know that the world is in a really crazy place. Please be safe. Be smart. Black Lives Matter. Donate. Find a foundation. And like I said, if you're out protesting, the world is scary right now. Please be cautious. Be careful. What you're doing is important, but it's also important for everybody to still be safe. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, comment. I want to know your thoughts on these 2 movies, if you've ever seen them, if you ever haven't, or if you fucking agree. If you thought The Broadway Melody was good, I'd love to have a back and forth conversation with you. Follow me on Letterboxd, Ice Cold Films, Twitter, @IceColdFilm, 1film. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.